Okay, so good morning everyone. Today, we will be discussing part 2 of your fluids and electrolytes. Okay, the first part is the regulation of extracellular fluid composition. Now class, homeostasis requires that the intake of substances equals their output. For example, class, diba, as I've said, in your duty, you're gonna have what we call intake and output measurement. What it means is that if you intake, let's say for example, 100 ml of fluid or water, it is expected that your output should also equal up at approximately 100 ml, no? Dapat equal gid siya. Okay? Needed water and ions enter the body by ingestion, di ba? We intake the needed water and it enters the body through ingestion. And then the excess water and ions, ito mga sobra, no, they will exit the body by excretion, mainly through your kidneys. Okay? The amounts of water and ions entering the body, entering and leaving the body can vary over the short term. For example, class, daghan og greater quantities of water and ions are lost in the form of sweat. Okay? Kanang sington ka. Okay? Kung sington ka during a warm day, more amounts of water and ions are lost. Okay? Compared to those during cool days. However, over a long period, class, the total amount of water and ions in the body does not change unless the individual is growing, gaining weight, or losing weight. That means, class, no, when we say na kanang nag-sweat ka, you are sweating. Okay? You are losing a lot of fluid. That is just a short-term outlook. When we say a long-term outlook of extracellular fluid composition, class, long-term outlook, it means that we are either growing, gaining weight, or losing weight, di ba? If you lose weight, you lose a few pounds of or a few milliliters of fluid. If you are losing weight, if you are gaining weight, you also gain fluid instead. Regulating the amounts of water and ions in the body involves the coordinated participation of several organ systems. But the kidneys are the most important, diba? As we've mentioned in our previous topic, no? The kidneys are the main excretory organs of the body. Excretory. They can compensate for the loss of excretion of the other organs. But the loss of your kidney, if ang imo gani kidney mawala, class, it will result in probably death because the rest of the other organs cannot compensate for the loss of the kidneys. Okay. It includes the skin, liver, digestive tract playing supporting roles, diba? The skin, liver, and digestive tract, they are also capable of excretion, but as I've said, no, it is the kidney's main role. Two mechanisms help regulate the level of ions in the extracellular fluid. The first one is thirst regulation, and the second one is the individual regulation of ions. Individual regulation of ions, or ion concentration regulation. Okay, let's start, for example, first with our thirst regulation. Water intake is controlled by neurons in the hypothalamus. Diba, class, no? Our hypothalamus has now controlled lots of things. Number one, it has controlled most of our sympathetic and parasympathetic tract. Diba, kasi those tracts going to our digestive system. Aside from that, class, it also controls our heart. It also controls a portion of our lungs. Diba? So the hypothalamus is very important. Now, these neurons that control water intake, are collectively called the thirst center. Thirst is the sensation that induces an urge to drink liquid. So kanang uhaw ka. You are uhaw. Okay? An increase in thirst is usually associated with a reduction in water content of the body. whereas a decrease in thirst is associated with adequate water content of the body. Now class, if there is less fluids in your body, obviously class, you will be thirsty. Whereas class, if you are adequately hydrated, you will no longer be thirsty. That is how thirst regulation works. But it is explained like this, okay? The hypothalamus can sense either an increased blood concentration or a large decrease in blood pressure. Class, when we say increased blood concentration, class, it means that there is decreased fluids in blood. Because if blood is concentrated, there is also a decrease in fluid, diba? If there is more fluid, it will make the blood more dilute. Now, it could also be triggered by a large decrease in blood pressure, diba? If there is also a decrease in fluids, class, it is expected that there should also be a decrease in blood volume. Pen. Blood volume. And if there is decreased blood volume, it is expected that there will also be a decrease in blood pressure. Okay? Okay. Hala. Shit. A sudden drop of blood pressure, such as during shock, activates the thirst center. Okay? Triggering the sensation of thirst. Moinom na galing tubig, class, or consumption of water increases the blood volume and allows the blood pressure to return to its normal value. Diba? Because there is a decrease in fluids, class, it will activate the thirst mechanism, and the thirst mechanism will urge us to drink fluids. Once we have consumed our fluids, it will now increase fluids, which will in turn increase fluids in the blood, and in turn increase blood volume, which will in turn also increase blood pressure. Okay? Other stimuli, class, can also trigger the sensation of thirst. For example, class, if the mucosa of the mouth becomes dry, the thirst center is activated. Okay? If the mucosa of the oral cavity is dry, the thirst center will become activated. Okay? Next is our normal lab values of ions in the body. I want to discuss this to you as early as now so that next semester you will not be overwhelmed by the amount of lab values in the body. Okay? Because daghan kini sila, class. I remember. Daghan kini sila. This is just for the blood. Okay? Okay. So first is sodium. Now, class, I will teach you a memorization technique. Okay? Just remember, class, that sodium is 135 to 145. Just remember. Milli equivalents per liter. Milli equivalents per liter. Okay. Potassium, class, it is memorized like this. Okay. Where can you commonly find potassium? You can commonly find potassium in bananas. Correct? Bananas. Now class, in a batch of bananas, class, just remember, normally there are 3 to 5 bananas in a batch. So you can remember, no, na that the potassium is 3 to 5 milli equivalents per liter. Naglibog mo, class. Diba, kung sa ka-batch of bananas, it looks like that. Kaya bitong magtapad-tapad ang bananas. Yes. Normally, class, there is about 3 to 5 bananas in a batch. Okay, so that's how I remembered it during my board exam. Next is chloride. Now, class, chloride, class, you usually associate it with chlorine. Okay, so think, when you say chloride, think swimming pool. Okay, swimming pool. Sir, nga naman, swimming pool man, sir. Okay, because, class, chloride is 95 to 105. Okay, and ang swimming pool, class, remember, ang entrance usually sa swimming pool is around 95 to 105 pesos. Entrance sa inyong swimming pool is usually 95 to 105 pesos. Para dili mo makalimot. Next is our calcium. Now, class, this is very easy to memorize, class. This is very easy to memorize. When you say calcium, class, just remember, class, call, okay? Who do you call when there is an emergency? Diba? 911. So, 911. Okay? So, when you say calcium, class, the normal lab value is 9 to 11 milligrams per deciliter. Milligrams per deciliter. Next is phosphorus. Now, class, phosphorus is my favorite because it is like this. Okay? This is 4. Okay? 4, when we say 4, 4. Okay? 4. Next is us or us. There is 2 of us or just the 2 of us. Okay? So that's why, class, the normal lab value, class, no? If you remember, if you want to memorize it, is 2 or us to 4. 2 to 4 milligrams per deciliter. Next is our magnesium. Magnesium, class, when you hear magnesium, think magnifying glass. Now, class, a magnifying glass usually has a zoom level of 1.5 to 2.5 milligrams per deciliter. Diba? A magnifying glass, it will zoom 1.5 times to 2.5 times magnification. So, to memorize your magnesium, just remember a magnifying glass, 1.5 to 2.5 milligrams per deciliter. Class, those are just shortcuts. Matik na. Okay. Lastly, class, is our bicarbonate or our HCO3. There's no memorization technique for this. Just remember it's 22 to 26 milliequivalents per liter. Milliequivalents per liter. Now, next is our ion concentration regulation. If the water content, class, or concentration of ions in the ECF deviates from its normal range, cells cannot control the movement of substances across their cell membrane or the composition of their intracellular fluid. Sir, what do you mean by that? Sir, let's say for example, class. Okay? This is your cell. This is the intracellular, okay? And this is the bloodstream, extracellular. Now, class, let's say, for example, there is lots of sodium here. Okay? The tendency is it will pull water towards the sodium. Water from inside the cell towards the sodium. Therefore, class, your body or your cells will suffer what we call cell dehydration. Okay, it is like that. Okay, if there is a deviation from the normal, let's say for example, as I said, no, there's an increase in sodium concentration in the blood. It will pull water from your intracellular space towards the extracellular space, diba? So the cells can no longer the cells have altered their composition, no? The intracellular fluid has altered its composition. Okay. Diba? As I've said, it has altered, the alteration of its intracellular concentration. Next is ion concentration regulation. The consequence is abnormal cell function or even cell death. Keeping the extracellular fluid composition within a normal range is therefore required to sustain life. Okay? It is required to sustain life because we do not want cell death. Okay? Cell death is different from apoptosis because diba apoptosis is programmed cell death, whereas cell death no is actual death of the cell yun, no, by unnecessary means. Now class, ion concentration regulation involves regulating positively charged ions such as our sodium, potassium, and calcium in the body fluids. These class are particularly important. Okay, action potentials, muscle contractions, and cell membrane permeability depend on the maintenance of a narrow range of concentration of these ions or the positively charged ions. Now class, I want you to remember this. Take this to heart. It is most prevalent, especially with potassium. Okay? Most prevalent, especially with potassium. Because class, potassium, as you will see later, it is the only one that only has one mechanism. It is the only one that has one mechanism. And potassium class is very dangerous class. If you suffer from increased potassium, or what we call hyperkalemia, or if you suffer from decreased potassium or hypokalemia class, those are very dangerous conditions. Number one, because potassium affects the conduction of the heart. Okay, it affects the conduction of the heart. So if the potassium is very low or very high, it can affect the conduction of the heart, and therefore we will suffer arrhythmias or dysrhythmias. Okay. While negatively charged ion class such as chloride are secondarily regulated by mechanisms that control positively charged ions. The negatively charged ions are attracted to the positively charged ions. When the positively charged ions are transported, the negatively charged ions move with them. It will move with them. Okay. So next is the regulation of sodium ions. Sodium ions are the dominant ions in the extracellular fluid. Diba? As I mentioned in the previous video, no? Sodium is the major cation of the extracellular space or in the extracellular fluid. Osmotic pressure class is the force that causes the net movement of water towards an area with a higher solute concentration. Okay? Okay, let me explain to you first what we mean when we say osmotic pressure. Sige, tagyaw-yaw ng osmotic pressure. Let's say, for example, this is your bloodstream. This is your bloodstream. Now, class, this is your cells, okay? And in between your cells is your interstitial space. Naridiri is our plasma, di ba? If you remember, class, the plasma and interstitial fluid, they are both extracellular. ECF na silang duha, while this one inside the cell is intercellular fluid. Now, class, let's say for example, class, let's say for example, there is lots of sodium. There is lots of sodium. Not sodium, no. Let's say for example, class, there is lots of proteins. Okay? Proteins in the interstitial fluid. Daghan. Okay? Now, class, this is water. Water in the bloodstream or in the plasma. Now, class, when we say hydrostatic pressure, class, if you remember, it is the pressure that is forcing blood to move. It is the pressure that is forcing blood to move. Okay? Whereas class, when included in that movement class, included in the movement of hydrostatic pressure, no, is the movement of water towards the outside of the cell. Okay? When you are moving if you're moving water, there's a tendency that it will move outside the bloodstream and enter an area of high solute concentration. Diba? Daghan man og protein dire. So protein will attract the water and the water will be pulled towards your interstitial space. Okay. Now class, that is hydrostatic pressure. Okay? Now class, here is how sodium works. Let's say for example, this is sodium. Okay? Sodium is yellow. Now if you remember class, water follows sodium. Wherever sodium goes, water follows. Okay? Aside from that class, diba? Wherever protein goes, water follows. Wherever sodium goes, water follows. Wherever protein goes, water also follows. Now class, that is the reason why sodium and albumin, a protein, diba? Protein ng albumin, are the main contributors to maintaining osmotic pressure because it works like this. Diba water, if you remember, water is attracted to your sodium. Okay? The hydrostatic pressure is the pressure that is forcing fluids out of the compartment or the bloodstream. While due to the presence of sodium class, since there is sodium inside the blood, it will pull fluid back. Pull fluid back. Now class, since it has pulled fluid back, that is what we call osmotic pressure. Diba anak ko last meeting? Osmotic pressure is the pulling force that will cause net movement. When we say net movement class, the hydrostatic pressure and the osmotic pressure has equalized, and therefore the water will no longer be able to exit. The water will no longer be able to exit or enter. That is how it maintains osmotic pressure. Since the sodium will attract, diba? Since the sodium will attract water and the the proteins will also attract water, they will attract water towards each other. In turn, it will not allow movement of water. Okay, so that is how it works. Now class, how do we regulate sodium in the body? Okay? Class, sodium class has a recommended daily intake of 2.4 grams per day. I want you to remember that, okay? 2.4 grams per day. But the average Filipino class, no, we usually eat more. Okay? We usually eat more. Approximately around 3 to 4 times more than the recommended amount. No? Now the class, the kidneys will provide the major route by which excess sodium is secreted. Sodium ions are excreted in the body in perspiration or sweating. Kana bitaw magsingot ka. Normally, only a small quantity of sodium is lost each day in the form of sweat, but it increases during exercise. Aside from that class, the primary mechanisms that regulate sodium concentrations in ACF are sensitive to changes in extracellular fluid. They are sensitive to changes in ECF concentration and or blood pressure. Okay? They are sensitive to changes in extracellular fluid concentration and blood pressure. Now class, these mechanisms do not directly monitor sodium levels. Dili nila monitor directly ang sodium levels, no? But they can monitor the quantity or amount of sodium. Okay, they can monitor the quantity of the amount or the amount of sodium. Okay, for example class. Okay, for example class, for example, the quantity of sodium is very high in the bloodstream. Daghan og sodium sa imong bloodstream. Okay? In turn class, since there is a lot of sodium, there is also an increase in solute concentration. Okay? Diba? Daghan na kayo atong sodium. We have too much sodium in our bloodstream now. Since there is too much sodium in our bloodstream, we are now increasing the concentration of sodium, which is a solute in the bloodstream. Now class, in turn, since the concentration is increased, even though it is sodium, there will be a decrease in fluids. There will be a decrease in fluids because sodium will displace the water. Okay? Sodium will displace the water. Now class, since there is a decrease in fluids, this will trigger a release or increase in our antidiuretic hormone, our ADH. Diba? Our ADH. Now class, if you remember class, no? If you remember, our ADH, it will trigger an increase in H2O reabsorption, which will recycle the water passing through the tubules and putting them back to the bloodstream. Aside from that class, it will also increase thirst. Okay? Thirst. Okay? Tungod class, since there is an increase in H2O reabsorption, there is a decrease in urine output. Diba? Sige, ato balik ko. Let's draw it from now on. Okay, this is your distal convoluted tubules. Okay, this is your peritubular capillaries. Water, normally in your DCT class, water, it will be reabsorbed, diba? And some of it will be going towards your urine. Okay. But class, since there is an increase in ADH, the ADH will stimulate the DCT to increase H2O reabsorption. Increase H2O reabsorption. In turn class, it will reabsorb the H2O back towards our capillaries. Okay. So where is the water now? The water is inside your capillaries. Okay. Because the water has moved from the tubules towards the capillaries, there is now less water, less fluids in the filtrate. There is now less fluids in the filtrate. If there are less fluids in the filtrate class, obviously, it will cause a decrease in urine output. Okay? It will cause a decrease in urine output. Now, class, since the water is now here, since the water is now here in your capillaries, eventually, the water will arrive at the site where there is lots of sodium, and it will merge there, no? It will make the sodium diluted, or it will make the blood diluted, diba? Because there is lots of sodium, diba? Daghan kay sodium dire. There's too much sodium. But if we add a lot of water to your sodium, diba? If we add a lot of water to your blood, if we add a lot of water to your blood class, it will make the blood less and less concentrated. Less and less concentrated. Diba? That is our ADH. Diba? Atong ADH, it will conserve water. Conserve water. Okay. That is the first mechanism, class. And it also happens in reverse. Okay? In reverse. Diba, class? Diba, class? We started ganiha with an increase in blood sodium concentration, no, daghan kayo og sodium sa blood. Let's say for example there is no sodium in the blood. There is no sodium, gamay lang, salang kabuok, but there is lots of water, daghan kaayo og tubig. It will make the blood diluted, diba? This is now diluted. Hala, ballpen na sad. It will now make the blood diluted. Dili na siya concentrated, no, di ba? Diluted is the opposite of concentrated, no? So, it will make the blood diluted or the solute diluted. Okay? There is now decrease in solute concentration. Okay? There is now a decrease in solute concentration. Now, class, since there is a decrease in solute concentration, there will be lots of water, diba? Since there is lots of water, class, it will trigger a decrease in ADH secretion. When there is a decrease in ADH secretion, class, when there is a decrease in ADH secretion, there is also a decrease in water reabsorption. And there is also a decrease in thirst. Diba? Because there is too much water, you don't need thirst anymore. Okay. So in that instance, class, ingani na siya, class. Again, this is your distal convoluted tubule. And this is your peritubular capillaries. Okay. Let's say, for example, water is in your DCT. Water is in your DCT. Okay. Class, when ADH, class, when ADH, yawa ng bulpin na eh. When ADH, class, when ADH enters or stimulates your DCT, class, when ADH is decreased in your ACT, decreased, it will also decrease water reabsorption. So instead of water entering your capillaries, class, it will not do that. Dili na mahitabo. So your water will stay in the filtrate, wherein it will be excreted as urine. Diba? So that's why, class, if there is an increase in your ADH, like for example, during your diabetes mellitus, no, you have increased urine output. Diba? Diba? Because there is lots of water in your filtrate, you will obviously excrete that water as urine because it has not been reabsorbed. Okay? No need to reabsorb because there is lots of water. Okay? And now, class, since you are excreting water, obviously you're gonna decrease the amount of water in your bloodstream. If you have decreased the amount of water in your bloodstream, your concentration will go from diluted back to normal. Back to normal. That is how sodium regulation works. Aside from that, class, the other regulation involves blood pressure. Okay? Now, class, normally, class, elevated blood pressure, if increased imong BP, increased blood pressure under resting conditions, it will also result an increase in sodium. Okay? Increase in sodium. If there is a decrease in blood pressure, there is also a decrease in sodium. Now, class, there are lots of mechanisms involved in this class, blood pressure, no? The first one is our renin, angiotensin, aldosterone. Di ba, class? If you remember, class, in decreased blood pressure, it will activate our RAAS. Di ba? It will activate the RAAS, and the end result of RAAS is our RAAS, especially our aldosterone, is it will retain sodium and water. Class, if you retain sodium, class, obviously, class, it will also increase the sodium. Okay? Increase the sodium. Hala gadiha. Tangina. Next, class, is, di ba, RAAS man asya, class. If there is an increase in blood pressure, class, it is not RAAS. It is katong atong atrial natriuretic hormone. Okay? If there is an increase in blood pressure, specifically in your right atrium, class, it will allow the release of our atrial natriuretic hormone. Atrial natriuretic hormone will act on the kidneys or stimulate the kidneys to slow down reabsorption of sodium. Okay? Slow down reabsorption of sodium. Now, class, if you slow down reabsorption of sodium, class, sodium will not be reabsorbed by your capillaries. Instead, they will remain in your urine. They will be excreted as urine. Di ba? Excreted as urine. Since you are excreting a lot of urine, of sodium in your urine, obviously, class, it will decrease the amount of sodium in your blood. Di ba? So it's like that. It's very simple. Shit miming. Okay? Next is the regulation of potassium ions. Potassium ions are electrically excitable tissues such as muscles and nerves are highly sensitive to slight changes in extracellular potassium concentration. The extracellular concentration of potassium must be maintained within a narrow range. Di ba, class? Atong range, ani, class? It is, when we go back up, class, di ba, it is 3 to 5 milliequivalents. Diba sa atong potassium, class, no? Sa atong sodium, class, it is 135 to 145 milliequivalents per liter. Whereas, class, in our potassium, class, it is just 3.5 to 5 milliequivalents per liter. Now, class, aldosterone plays a major role in regulating the concentration of potassium in extracellular fluid. Kaya sir, ngano aldosterone man? Sir, tangina ka, sir. I thought, sir, aldosterone is responsible for sodium concentration. Now, hear me out, class. Ganito kasi yan, class. Ganito kasi yan. Okay. Let's say, for example, class, there is an increase in potassium in the blood. There is an increased potassium in the blood. We call that hyperkalemia. Okay, this is usually a result from dehydration or severe tissue damage such as those in burns. Okay, burns. Okay, in response, class, our aldosterone will increase in secretion. There is now an increase in secretion. Now, if you remember correctly, class, what is the function of our aldosterone? Number one is that it will reabsorb sodium. Tangina, sir. Sodium na naman, sir. Sodium. Pero we're talking about potassium. Aha. There is the thing. That is the thing. Okay? Class, always remember, class, your sodium and potassium are inversely proportional. Okay? Inversely proportional. Why? Because usually, they will displace each other. For example, class, if your sodium is high, chances are your potassium is low. Whereas, if your potassium is high, chances are your sodium is low. Okay? Opposite sila, class. They are opposites. Now, class, if there is an increase in aldosterone, we are reabsorbing sodium back to our bloodstream. So, it will obviously, class, increase sodium. Diba? It will increase sodium. Diba? It will increase sodium. Now, class, if it increases sodium, what will happen to the potassium? Diba? As I've said, they are inversely proportional. So, it will decrease potassium. Hala, diba? Starting from an increase, the release of aldosterone will increase sodium, which will in turn decrease potassium. That is how it is regulated. It also happens in the opposite way. Let's say, for example, there is a decrease in potassium. In turn, class, there will also be a decrease in aldosterone. If that happens, class, no, if there is a decrease in aldosterone, there is also a decrease in sodium, which will increase the amount of potassium. Diba? As I've said, they are compensating, no? Since we started with low, we end up with high. Because as I've said, no, they are what we call inversely proportional. Inversely proportional. Next is the regulation of calcium ions. Okay. Calcium ions, class, no, we have already discussed how this is regulated. It is regulated mainly with hormones. Okay? It is regulated mainly with hormones. Specifically, our parathyroid and our hormone and our calcitonin. Class, calcitonin. How do you regulate calcium? Now, if you remember, parathyroid hormone, class, it will increase bone breakdown. Increased bone breakdown, class, will increase calcium in the blood. Okay? In calcitonin, class, we will decrease bone breakdown, which in turn will decrease calcium in the blood. Okay? Class, that's it. Okay? Let's say, for example, your body is lacking calcium or your blood stream is lacking calcium. What your body will do is that it will stimulate or release parathyroid hormone. Okay? So that there will be more bone breakdown, which will lead to a increase in calcium in the blood. Class, if there is a decrease, or if there is too much calcium in the blood, class, if there is too much calcium in the blood, we will secrete calcitonin. Calcitonin, which will decrease bone breakdown, and it will also decrease calcium in the blood. Let me say it again, once again, di ba? Let's say, for example, there is too much calcium in the body or in the blood. Daghan ra kaayo og calcium sa blood. Okay. What your body will do is that it will release parathyroid. Di ba? If you remember, there's already too much calcium. If there's too much calcium, it will release parathyroid. Oh, too much, not enough calcium or less calcium. Okay, if there is not enough calcium, class, your body will release parathyroid hormone and it will increase your calcium in the blood. Diba? We started with decreased calcium. It will stimulate your parathyroid to increase bone breakdown, which in turn will increase calcium in the blood. If there is too much calcium, let's say for example, too much calcium, it will stimulate the release of your calcitonin, which will decrease bone breakdown and decrease calcium in the blood, diba? We started with decrease, ended with increase. We started with increase, ended with decrease. That is how you regulate calcium ions. And lastly, class, is the regulation of our phosphate ions. Phosphate ions. Class, phosphate and sulfate, class, are reabsorbed by active transport in the kidneys. However, class, the rate of reabsorption is so slow that it mostly is excreted in urine. Diba? Let's say, for example, this is our phosphate in our sodium. Kana. This is our distal convoluted tubules. This is our peritubular capillaries, PTC. Now, class, normally they are reabsorbed back to your capillaries. The problem is this. Okay? Not the problem. The situation is this. It is very slowly reabsorbed. Hinay kaayo ang iyang pagka-reabsorb. So most oftentimes, no, they will just stay in the filtrate. They will stay in the tubules, wherein they will just be excreted. Okay? Excreted. So for example, class, there is too much let's say for example, there is too much phosphate and sulfate in the bloodstream. Most often than not, even though they are too much, class, since the reabsorption is very slow, diba? Reabsorption is very slow ang reabsorption, no? Most often than not, they will just stay in the urine, wherein they will be excreted. So kung manubra gani, they will be excreted. Okay? As long as it is low, as long as this narrow range is maintained, class, there will be no problems with phosphate and sulfate ions. Okay? Lastly is our regulation of acid-base balance. Now, class, supposedly, class, no, there are three mechanisms involved in the regulation of our acid-base balance in the body. Number one is our buffer system. Number two is our respiratory system. And number three is your kidneys. However, I will only discuss the last two because, as I've noted, no, buffer systems will be discussed in your biochemistry. Ready na mo para na, class, inyong biochemistry. Okay, let's begin. The concentration of hydrogen in the body is reported as pH. The body fluid pH is maintained between 7.35 to 7.45. Any deviation from that range is life-threatening. The mechanisms that regulate body pH are critical. I repeat, critical for survival. Now class, it's like this class, mura na siya range. 7.35 to kinalasad. Musta naman yung Halloween diha class? Wasa, lutaw sa. Okay, to 7.45. Now class, if it is below 7.35, we are now acidic. Diba? Acidic. Niyawa, nagumba na dun akong ballpen class. Tang ina akong apple pencil. Di na andar. Full charge ba niya? Ano di andar? Allah. Acidic. Whereas class, in our 7.45, after that, if it is 7.45 or above, it is what we call basic or alkaline. Alkaline. Now class, how is it regulated by your respiratory system? Okay, number one class, the respiratory system responds rapidly to changes in pH and helps bring the pH of the body fluids back to normal. Now class, neurons in the respiratory system are highly sensitive to CO2 levels. If you remember class, CO2 levels class are slightly, CO2 is slightly acidic. Okay? Okay. Acidic. So if there is high CO2, there is also decreased pH. Diba? Because if the pH is decreased, class, it is acidic. Okay. So this is acidic. Now class, since that is acidic class, how is it eliminated by the body? Okay. Number one class, it will be eliminated in this way. Okay. The lungs or the respiratory system will increase rate and depth of respiration. Now class, if you increase the rate and depth, for example class, when we say rate, it is how fast you are breathing. How fast you are breathing and how deep you are breathing. Okay, so very fast and very deep. Now class, if we increase the rate and depth of respiration, class, it includes, okay? It includes, if we increase the rate and depth, it will eventually cause more what? Diba? Expiration. Class, diba expiration, more breathing out. If we are breathing out more, there will be more carbon dioxide going out. Diba? If we are breathing out more, there will be more carbon dioxide going out, which will decrease carbon dioxide. Okay? And since there is a decrease in carbon dioxide, the pH will slowly go back up. Diba? So it will normalize. Ganyan lang, class. Okay? But, let's say for instance, class, there is a decrease in CO2. Okay? Gamay ra kaayo og CO2. In turn, class, the pH will be increased. Diba? Since there is less CO2, the pH will suddenly increase, no? That is most likely alkaline. Diba? Acidic to ganiya. This is alkaline. Now, class, how do we eliminate, how do we increase alkalinity? Okay. What will happen there is that there will be a decrease in the rate and depth, okay, of respiration. Now, what do you mean by increased rate and depth? Increased rate and depth. Okay. Now, decreased rate and depth. Okay. Let's say, for example, class, diba? Too much of very little carbon dioxide, which causes alkalinity or basic, diba? Basic ng atong blood. When we say decreased rate, we are slowing down our breathing. Very slow. Aside from that, we are also decreasing the depth. So very very shallow depths, no? Shallow breaths, no? But very slow. Very slow. In that method, class, no? In that method, we are slowing down. In that method, class, we are decreasing sa to siya expiration. Yes, we are decreasing expiration. Okay, we are decreasing the amount of breathing out, diba? We are decreasing the amount of breathing out. And obviously, class, if you do not breathe out a lot, the carbon dioxide cannot escape. Okay? The carbon dioxide cannot escape. Therefore, if the carbon dioxide cannot escape, there will be a what? There will be a increase in carbon dioxide because the carbon dioxide cannot escape because there is decreased expiration. If there is an increase in carbon dioxide, it is expected as well na, diba, mo decrease atong pH. So it will normalize. Ayan, that is how it is maintained. Okay. That is how it maintains. And lastly, class, no, is our regulation of acid-base balance by the kidneys. Okay. Regulation of kidneys, the nephrons of the kidneys secrete hydrogen into the urine and therefore directly regulate the pH of bloody fluids, diba? The kidneys is a powerful regulator of pH, but it responds more slowly than does the respiratory system. Diba? Because the respiratory system, class, can instantly increase or decrease the rate and depth of breathing. Therefore, it can instantly compensate for changes in pH. No? But the kidneys are more powerful or more potent because they will directly affect the excretion of hydrogen. Okay? They will directly affect the excretion, but they are slower. The cell walls in our distal convoluted tubules are primarily responsible for the secretion of hydrogen. When blood pH is too low, secretion of hydrogen increases. At the same rate, reabsorption of carbon dioxide increases. Okay? So it looks like this. Okay, zoom in. As I've said, let's say for example, class. When blood pH is too low, ubos kayo ang blood pH, which means it is acidic, di ba? acidic. Okay. Let's say, for example, guys, this is your distal convoluted tubules. And this is your peritubular capillaries, imong bloodstream. Okay. Di ba, class? Remember, reabsorption and secretion. When blood pH is too low, secretion of hydrogen in the distal convoluted tubules increases. So, this is your hydrogen, di ba? Okay. When we say, class, secretion, this is your hydrogen in your bloodstream. When we say, class, secretion, it will pull the hydrogen towards the distal convoluted tubules. Okay? Okay. Because remember, class, remember, it is now acidic. Okay. Aside from that, class, there is also bicarbonate reabsorption. Okay? When you say bicarbonate reabsorption, di ba? If you remember, bicarbonate is basic. Di ba? Basic. Basic. Di ba? And this is acidic. When we say reabsorption, class, we are moving it back to the capillaries, di ba? Secretion gani from the blood capillaries towards the tubules, wherein it will be excreted, hydrogen will be excreted as urine. When we say reabsorption from the tubules, they will be reabsorbed back to our bloodstream. Now, class, since our blood pH is very low, okay, now there is bicarbonate. Bicarbonate, class, which is alkaline, will normalize, it will increase the pH, and eventually it will normalize. Okay? It will normalize. Bali. It goes the opposite way if the blood pH is increased. Balik ta. Let's say, for example, class, the blood pH is high. Okay, this is your distal convoluted tubule, and this is your PCT or PTC, distal convoluted tubules. Now, class, okay. If there is too high pH, class, taas ang yung pH, class, secretion of hydrogen in the DCT decreases. Okay? Hydrogen, it will stay in your capillaries because secretion is not decreased. Secretion is decreased. So the hydrogen will not go to your DCT. Your hydrogen will instead stay in your bloodstream. Stay in your bloodstream. Aside from that, class, bicarbonate reabsorption is also decreased or inhibited. It is also decreased or inhibited. So your bicarbonate, class, will instead stay in your distal convoluted tubules, wherein it will be secreted as urine. Okay, since there is no bicarbonate anymore and hydrogen stays in your blood, okay, hydrogen stays in your blood, and since your bicarbonate is being excreted, it will result in a decrease in pH. Diba? You are removing what keeps the hydrogen or the pH high. You are removing what keeps the pH high. In turn, it will promote a decrease in pH back to normal. Allah. That's it. Okay, that is it. Now, class, as a side note, for your asynchronous classes, asynchronous classes, class, di ba? I want you to read page, I don't know the exact page, no? I think it is page 572 on your book. Okay? On your book. It will discuss acidosis and alkalosis. Class, I want you to read a little bit of that, no? Even though it is not included in our even though it is not included in our human anatomy curriculum, I might include it in your semi-final exam. Don't worry, it is very short. It is a summary of your acidosis and alkalosis. Okay? Okay. And with that we are done. Thank you for